welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming today. My name is Jennifer Zhao. I'm a college admission consultant, and I have my friend here, Jim Addeo. He's the owner of Prowess Test Prep. We were just chatting, what was it, like a couple weeks ago about how the SAT was changing, and a lot of students were wondering what were the changes, what's happening. So we got the idea just to do a quick Zoom session, and Jim is really the expert here. So I'm going to introduce him, hand it over to him. But just a little bit of history is that Jim and I actually went to the same college. We both went to Cornell. So that's kind of our connection, and we're both in Albany, New York. And I had the pleasure of meeting him in person, even though we're all in our little boxes here. But we're both based in Albany, New York, and I know some of you might be everywhere in the country, in the world. But we're in upstate New York, and we're both very happy to help you with your college journey. So with that, I'll just hand it over to Jim.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for dropping in. As Jen said, my name's Jim Addeo, and I graduated from Cornell University along with her. And I've been doing SAT prep as well as some other tests, ACT, GRE, for about 20 years now. I've been through one change in the SAT, and I am forgetting about when, but around 2013, 2014, a new SAT to replace an old version came out. And it does present more complexity for anyone in that transition year. And so I've been through it before. And I think I know a little bit about like the advantages or pitfalls of this path and that. Yeah, this will basically be my second experience with such a change. And then obviously, so it's going to be, as we've said in the emails, this time around, anyone who's a sophomore now, graduating class of 2025, is dealing with a transition year where the first half of the year is the old SAT, or the current one rather, and then the second half of the year is the new digital one. So that's the gist of what's going on. So what I'm sharing my own personal website, and all the material that we cover tonight, just about, is going to be on prowessprep.com. You can always text me if you forget the site, or you could jot it down now. You see it at the very top of the screen, prowessprep.com. And you can click on diagnostics and planning, and that will display essentially all the things I'm going to cover tonight. So the first thing on that part of my page, this is kind of a table of contents for what we're going to do tonight. Attention sophomores, planning for the change in the SAT. So what I'm going to be doing first is how does the change in the SAT affect when I should plan my test dates? Second thing, what are the major differences between the current paper SAT as we have now and the new digital SAT? And then the third thing, major thing tonight, is on to kind of more specifics on the matter. Will the digital SAT pose new question types? It will, to a degree. So I'll do a little bit of a comparison, current SAT to new one in terms of question types. And then just really briefly, so on my site, you're going to see like an attention sophomores portion. And then very briefly at the end, I'll mention some tips for general planning for all students, regardless of kind of their year. But obviously, starting off with the main thing tonight. So let me cover bullet number one here. How does the change in the SAT affect when I should plan my test dates? And there's a link on my page that will point you to a calendar. So this is a calendar of SAT test dates. The March 11th SAT was actually yesterday, but we have all of these. If you're a sophomore now, you are eligible for any of these tests drifting into 2024. And in fact, this calendar ends with the June SAT, but if you're a sophomore now, you can kind of like wrap around and like keep on going. So there's going to be a June, there's going to be an August, an October, November, and December of 2024. So what does this mean in terms of planning? So the way I see it, if you're a sophomore now, you have a three-pronged decision you could make. Number one, you could start early and finish early if you want to just target the current SAT. So let me kind of see if I can, yeah, we can do both at the same time. So if you're a sophomore right now, and let's say you really don't want to deal with a digital exam, so then you would say, all right, I would really like to only take the current paper test. I'm already familiar with it, with the PSAT, etc. Then here's what you could do. You have the ability to take the SAT up until December, the end of this calendar year. So you have 6 SAT dates, and that's not bad because I would generally advise people take the SAT 2 or 3 times. So if you decided as a sophomore you wanted to knock this out before the change, you can. If you are in Algebra 2 right now, you will have all of the math that is needed in order to take the SAT. If you're a sophomore now and you're not taking Algebra 2 until next year, in fact, I think it might be a little bit of an issue to try to get the SAT done early because you won't really have all of the math curriculum needed to maximize your score. So one thing I'm going to stress is whether or not you're taking Algebra 2 as a sophomore now, or are you taking it next year, because that's going to matter for your decision. Now, let's say I'm a sophomore now and I haven't had Algebra 2 yet. I'm taking it next year, and I realize, okay, I really don't want to get the SAT done early. Well, then you're kind of on to option number 2 here. Hold off. Don't take the SAT. Wait until your junior year and start with the March exam of 2024. So if you're a junior of next March, you'll still have the March, the May, the June, and as a senior, you'll still be able, there will be an August 2024, an October, and as long as you're not applying early, November, December. And then besides that, there's a third option. There is an alternative to the SAT, which is the ACT exam, and the ACT is not changing. So there are some people that might be attracted to the fact that there's one consistent test that is not going to change. The ACT is paper-based, and if that's the case, and you're a sophomore right now, then you would have the ability to take any of these tests starting next month, April, all the way through until your fall of junior year and on to the winter and spring. So that's a third option that some people might take advantage of. Now, that's not to say you can't do both. Take the current paper SAT and also try the digital SAT. But I like to stress not over testing and overworking yourself. So everyone has a different opinion on this, but if it were me and I were the student dealing with it, I would want to choose one or the other. Either committing myself to the current SAT or deciding I'm going to wait for the digital SAT. Personally, I don't like the idea of prepping for 2 different exams on top of other things, normal school, AP exams, extracurriculars. All right, so that's it in terms of the scheduling options. And again, this is on my website, so you'll have access to this.
Jim, there was a question here about the PSAT. Do you know if that is changing over to digital?
Oh, really good question. Yes, the PSAT is going to be digital in October of 2024. So, no, so I'm sorry, of 2023. This coming October, the PSAT will be of the digital variety. Okay, and I did see.
Yeah, just to repeat that, so the PSAT will become digital this October, so in
Correct.
2023.
Mhm.
So if you are a sophomore now, then that's when you'll be a junior in October, so you'll be taking the digital PSAT,
Right.
right? Okay.
So I did see a couple of questions in the chat, and one says, if you take tests later, I guess that, let's say March 2024, does that impact college applications? What are the cons of waiting? Um, there, if there is no con of waiting, I don't. It's not going to impact your college applications to show that you took the SAT later in your junior year. What impacts college applications is what score you get. And but if you decide to wait for the digital SAT exam and not take the current paper one, that's not going to be looked upon as a bad thing in any way. And if you wait for the digital SAT, you wait until March of your junior year, you still do have at least 5 test dates to work with, and maybe even a couple more. I was going to say one more thing on that, but it kind of drifted from me, but maybe it'll come back. But yeah, no, there's not a problem with waiting. And in fact, I think if you're not taking Algebra 2, if you're a sophomore now, but not taking Algebra 2 until your junior year, until next year, I don't think you're going to be poised to get your best math score really until near the end of Algebra 2. I see another question. No, okay, no, actually, I think I got them all. That's it. Okay. All right, so I will move on now to the next kind of chunk of this discussion, and that's going to be, second thing is going to be, what are the major differences, like in terms of pacing, timing, the big things? What's the major differences between the current paper test and the new digital test? And again, you can go to my website to see this, click here for the comparison, so you'll have access to this anytime. So here's a side-by-side look. Now, I put a few things in bold because they're going to be maybe things that I find particularly important, and I will discuss those a little bit more. So number one, the obvious change, the test medium. The current paper SAT is on paper. You use a bubble sheet, and that's it. Multiple choice answers and a few student response grid-in answers, right on a good old classic bubble sheet. The new digital SAT is going to be done on a laptop that you bring into a testing center, or in fact, if you don't own a laptop, the test center will administer one to you. So that's item number one. Item number two, and a lot of people look at this as a positive for the new digital SAT. The current SAT is about 3 hours, and the new digital SAT is quite significantly shorter, 2 hours, 14 minutes. I tutor and teach a lot of students, and most people would agree that one significant issue with the current test is just endurance and the ability to focus that long. Now, 2 hours, 14 minutes, still a long test, but man, that last hour on the paper SAT is a really tough one. And I guess I think it would feel pretty nice to not have most of that last hour on the digital one. On the other hand, I do think looking at paper for me is a little bit easier than looking at a screen. But again, that's all, personal preference. Next thing, test format. So what are the sections like on the current SAT? Well, the first section on the current SAT is the reading, and I just kind of bolded the fact that it's 65 minutes. If I get, or if I get complaints about one section, it is the first one. That it's very long, a very long period of consistent focus you have to have. And a lot of people say that they do kind of like start to lose it before the end. So I find in terms of the endurance factor, the focus factor, the current SATs, reading section number 1 is tough on a lot of people, but of course, perhaps not if you are a big reader. Following the first section, the reading section on the SAT is a writing section, which is more correcting grammar. That one's 35 minutes. Now, on the new SAT, the digital one, there's not a reading section and then a writing section. There's 2 sections that mix in reading and writing. So meaning reading comprehension and a test of grammar is going to be basically each section 1 and 2 will be a combination of both, and each one is 27 minutes each. And that's a fairly short slice of time compared to one 65-minute reading. Onto the math. I bolded this. On the current SAT, there is a non-calculator math section where any arithmetic you have to do, is by hand. Long division, multiplication, figuring out, what the, 4th power of 4 is. It would have to be done by hand. Some people don't mind it. Other people are very, very calculator reliant and complain about the non-calculator section on the current SAT. Following the 25-minute non-calculator section of the current SAT, there is a calculator section that is 55 minutes. And that's also kind of encroaching on a pretty long time where people may lose focus. And in contrast, on the new SAT, there are 2 math sections, but calculators allowed on both. They're 35 minutes each. So a little more kind of cut and dry and short on the new digital test. Now, test navigation. If you can skip, if you're allowed, you can certainly on the paper test skip questions and go back to previous questions as long as you stick to the current section you're in. Obviously, you're just flipping pages back and forth. You can move or navigate it however you want if you stay in the section that's assigned. And that's true on the new digital test too. If you're within the section you're taking, you can skip questions and you will be able to go back to questions. You can also mark questions. And I'm going to show you what I mean about that. So I'm going to kind of go to a new share. What does that mean to be able to mark questions? So I'm going to see if I can, I haven't tried this before. This will be the first time. So I am going to try to show you a sample digital SAT right now. Jen, are you seeing a little window with a test question?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I see the section 1, reading and writing.
Perfect. Okay. Now I want to see, you know what? I was a little afraid of this. They're not letting me, while I'm in Zoom, also kind of scroll, but you get the idea. So there'll be a question. And in this case, this is a sentence, a vocabulary fill-in question. And I can obviously select whatever multiple choice answer I want. I can also decide, you know what? Nope, I'm not going to answer this. I'm going to go on to the next question. And if I do that, I can also hit previous and go back and forth that way. I can also, oh, good, I'm glad this popped up. I can also click this box here on the digital SAT and I can move back and forth. So if I know, for example, I skipped question 1, actually it shows me if a question is unanswered. It shows me what question I'm currently on. And if I want to, I can mark a question for review. So let me see, all of a sudden I feel like it's letting me do stuff. Okay, it's not letting me scroll. Oh no, now I can scroll, beautiful. Okay, so let's say I want to mark number 1 for review. Let's say I do answer it, but I'm a little unsure. I want to mark it for review. I can then move on to the next question. I'll do question number 2. Let's say I'm totally sure on this question and I don't want to mark it for a review. Same thing with number 3. I'm sure about the answer. And then, and so on. So at any point, I can click this and I can see what's going on. Obviously, I haven't answered any of the questions ahead. I've answered all these questions, but I already know that, ooh, if I have time, I want to go back and check out number 1 again. And I guess actually, guys, I'll just show you one more thing. If I were to skip a question, and let's say I skipped a question, then that would be clear as well. So once I'm done, I can kind of at any point look at this menu and be like, oops, oh my God, I almost forgot. I never answered number 4. So I think this interface is pretty clear. And obviously, you would want to mark questions for review if you've already answered it, but you're unsure. I even think there can be a system of marking questions you haven't answered. So, for example, on the math, there may be questions that you skipped because you decided, I have absolutely no idea how to answer this question. And there may be questions you skipped on the math because, you know what, I'm skipping it for now, but I think I can do it. I just feel like I want to get other things done, or I feel like it might take a long time. So when I teach a course, I'm going to encourage people, like have some sort of meaning when you skip questions. Is it something you feel you may be able to tackle? Well, mark it. And if you're skipping a question because you feel like it's completely hopeless, then don't mark it. And if you're the type that wants to skip and hunt around for questions a lot, at least you have a coding for, why you skipped a question. And also, you have a coding for when you've got questions done. Again, like you're sure about it or you're a little unsure. So that's the deal with marking questions. And now I think I can go right back to, hopefully I can find it okay. I can go right back to where we are. So that's, the ability on the new test to skip, go back, or mark questions. Next is test scoring. So it didn't change. It's 2 to 800 score, 800 maximum score on reading, writing. Same thing on the new one. Math, it's graded from 200 to 800 in the math, and that's the same scoring scale on the new one. But what's different is on the current SAT, your score is just basically connected to the number of questions you get correct overall, really. And the scoring is adaptive on the digital SAT. So adaptive means it does mean that the test will be more difficult. If the test will become more difficult if you're more successful on it. And it will remain easier if you're getting more questions wrong. But it is not adapting to you with every single question answered. The way the adaptive issue works, I've written down here at the bottom of the screen. Adaptive scoring means, so let's say you're taking the reading, writing. Reading, writing has 2 sections. If you're taking section number 1 of the reading, writing, this section 1 will determine a broad assessment of your ability, and section 2 of the reading, writing will fine tune. So what does that mean? Well, answering fewer than 50% of section 1 questions correctly is going to initiate an easier section 2. But it's only going to allow you a final score in the range of approximately 200 to 570. So that's if you answer fewer than 50% of section 1 questions correctly. Now, if you answer more than 50%, so it's a line in the sand. You really want to be over that 50% marker. If you answer more than 50% of section 1 questions correctly, you're going to get a harder section 2 of reading, writing, but your score range can be anywhere from 450 to 800. Now, everything I said is true for the 2 reading, writing sections, and that exact same scheme is true for the 2 math sections. So on both sides of the test, section 1 establishes a broad assessment, and section 2 fine tunes. And I'm going to pause for any pressing questions right after I just mentioned the score, the wait time for score. One other big difference here: the current paper SAT takes about 2 weeks to get your score. It in some cases more. And then the new digital SAT, they claim you are going to get your scores within that week. So that's a little bit nicer in terms of planning. So again, we're going to do a Q&A at the end, but sometimes I feel like you get a lot of information. I'm going to check the chat if there's any questions on kind of this broad side-by-side comparison. Let me take a look here.
Yeah, Jim, there's a question that came in. Does less time for I would presume for the digital one, mean also less questions? Total
That's
number of
correct.
questions?
Great question. That is correct. And as a matter of fact, I apologize. That would have been a good statistic to have on this. But there are, let me count these up, 58, 88. There are 93, no, wait, hold on, 52, 82, 86 reading, writing questions on the current SAT, 86 reading, writing questions. On the new SAT, it's closer to 60. I don't have my numbers perfect, but yeah, about 25% fewer questions. Math, there's 58 questions on the current SAT, and there's going to be more like somewhere in the 40s, like 42, 45 questions on the actually, yeah, I think that are somewhere in the 40s. So yes, roughly about 25% fewer questions on the new digital SAT compared to the current.
Great, thank you for that, Jim. I just typed those numbers into the chat in case other folks are interested. I had a question, Jim, just about kind of a little bit overall. I know that with the paper SAT, there's plenty of practice tests that are out there, but are there practice tests for a digital SAT at this point?
Yes. Now I've done as much research as I can so far, and there are right now, this is on the College Board website. It are also on my site. I'm on my site, so I might as well go to it. There are 4, they call them, I'm going to go to this. They're under my page, under materials. There are 4 linear practice tests available. And that means they're actually on paper. So they have new SAT style questions, but it's just on paper and it's a non-adaptive test, obviously. So you can access those. Now, what about taking an actual computer adaptive SAT? And right now, so I basically made myself a College Board account, and I went to, on the College Board, looked for how to take a practice SAT, and I was instructed to download the app Blue Book. Now, the app Blue Book is on my computer. I made an account with it, and I'm in Blue Book right now. All it allows me to do is a short 8-question sample set. Right now, when I try to click take a full practice digital SAT, it's telling me that they're not available. Now, I didn't do exhaustive research, and if anybody has seen differently, you can chime in. But right now, my College Board account is not allowing me to take a full digital SAT. Has anyone experienced anything different? You can unmute or put it in the chat, because I'm learning too.
Yeah, I was just curious because I know some students might be interested to get a head start on starting to prepare for the digital one, but you know, I
Well,
think.
I am going to address practice tests too at the end of this as well.
Great.
So, are there other questions in regards to these kind of major differences? I'm going to go back to my website now, and I'm going to go back to diagnostics and planning. And if not, Jen, you're not seeing anything, right?
No, I think we're good. I just had one confirmation question about waiting until taking Algebra 2 to
Okay.
take the SAT. So I'm pretty sure we established that, but just double check with you.
Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, one more time. If you're a sophomore now and you're not taking Algebra 2 until your junior year, I would advise, waiting on the SAT for at least until you've had, say, half the year of Algebra 2. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't other schools of thought. It doesn't mean you can't start early, but it is something to consider that you won't have all the math curriculum you need for the test until you've completed Algebra 2. So, for this
Hey,
last,
Jim, oh, sorry
yeah,
for interrupting. Just had another question kind of related to this. When you say Algebra 2, okay, so does it also mean integrated math 2? So I'm not really familiar with integrated math compared to algebra. Do you know, Jim, that the difference between those classes?
you know, I have kind of heard the name, but to be honest, no, I cannot speak to that. But for whoever asked, um, I will certainly give my contact information, cell, and email, and I don't mind researching further. But that would be something I'd have to tackle later on. Um, Jen, is it fine if for
Yeah,
you, will you be blasting out my contact info to the people?
absolutely. I can
Okay.
just put it in the chat if you don't mind, Jim.
Yeah, put it right in the chat. Um, and my email and cell, and yeah, any questions I can't answer, I'll certainly do as much research as I can.
Thank you, Jim.
Got it. So I'm going to get on to now specifics, and while I'm talking about this, the specifics really are, will the digital SAT pose new question types? Now, as I do that, I'm going to actually be showing you flipping back and forth to, right in these tests. So I'll be looking at a regular current SAT, and I'll be going back and forth showing you some questions from the digital SAT. And so I'll start here with a major comparison. Now, the math section. So obviously this is review. Once again, the current paper SAT will have a 25-minute math section, no calc, and a 55-minute calculator section. The new digital SAT is just going to have two 35-minute math sections. Remember that the first one establishes a broad assessment. The second one is going to fine-tune your abilities, but both sections allow the calculator. Now, I found that in terms of the curriculum tested, no change at all. Algebra 1, Algebra 2, geometry, and stats on the old one, same as on the new one. And not only that, but the question distribution is also the same. So, if you are a student that says, I'm not a fan of geometry, I hope there's less geometry on the new one. No, none of that stuff is changing. So don't allow your strengths and weaknesses by field of math be a determiner of which test you're taking, because that's not going to matter. Another thing, the question types really aren't changing for the math at all. 75% of the math on the current test is multiple choice, and the other 25% is grid in student response. Now, I'll quickly show you a grid in student response. So when I say a grid in math question, hang on one sec, where are you? Here we go. So I'm going to a math section of the current SAT, and a grid in math question well, here's a multiple choice math question on the current SAT, A, B, C, D, and you bubble it in on your bubble sheet. A grid in math question, you'll notice no multiple choice. And on the current SAT, the last chunk of questions, not a lot of them, about 25%, are these non-multiple choice. And on your bubble sheet, you actually just need to, write in your answer 2/3, and there also is the opportunity to bubble in corresponding items that you need. Now, going back to our baseline page, one moment. Oh, almost there. All right. That is the case on the current one, and that is the case on the new digital one. Multiple choice questions and grid in questions, same distribution. Now, the only difference is this: on the current SAT, it's multiple choice first, grid ins last, and on the new SAT, they actually intermingle. So they're all just kind of peppered in different spots. I'm the type of person that when I'm on one task, I like to stay on that task. So I like to just do multiple choice. And then I would rather have like a different question type be the second thing I'm doing. So I like how the old SAT does it. However, on the new SAT, if you're like me and you want to just do all the multiple choice first and all the grid ins second, you can still do that. You just skip over the grid ins until the end. Or maybe you want to get the grid ins out of the way first. So you can still do it, but they're not laid out as conveniently. And then, I was saying before, I should have had this stat, and I do. So that's great. So to that question before, 58 questions in the math in 80 minutes. On the current SAT, that's a minute 22 per question. And then on the new digital SAT, somewhat fewer questions. But also, this may matter. There is somewhat more time per question. So the pace is a little bit slower, and I don't see the new digital SAT having harder questions. So that might be an inquiry people would have, like, oh, you have more time per question. Does that mean the questions are harder? Not so far as I've seen. You just simply have more time per question. That's it on the math, actually. Like they really are going to be, the math is going to be very much the same in every way, except that you're doing it on a computer instead of on paper. You will have scrap paper on the new digital SAT, by the way. Whereas on the current test, obviously, you can work on the paper you're on. Any questions on the math differences? Because there's not a lot. I'm just checking the chat too. Okay. All right. Now, reading, writing. There are more changes here, I feel. So, again, to stress, maybe one of the biggest complaints on the current test is there's for the reading, there's one 65-minute run of reading comp in section 1. And in fact, there are some scattered reading comp-like questions in section 2 of the current test. On the new digital SAT, the longest, really what you've got is a 20-minute run of reading comp in section 1 and a 20-minute run about of reading comp in section 2. The sections 1 and 2 are longer than 20 minutes, but there's grammar questions and like vocabulary fill-in questions peppered in there. So there really isn't a big, long, continuous run of actual raw reading. Now, if you look at the old SATs reading, there's 5 long passages, about 4 to 6 minutes reads, and each one you have about 10 questions per passage. So let me show you that. Old SAT reading comp. I'm going to go to a reading comp passage in the old SAT exam. And forgive me, I just have a lot open at once. Okay, so here's the old SAT, the current SAT. A reading comp passage looks like this. It's about a page of reading overall and a 10-question set. you've got to do that 5 times total, okay? Because there's 5 passages. On the digital SAT, this is different. On the digital SAT, there are not any of these longer passages. You just have about 18 little passages. They're like 30-second reads, and each one has 1 question per passage. So I can quickly show you that on the digital SAT. Here we go. So here's a digital SAT reading section. Now, you guys are looking at a paper version linear test. So obviously it's not going to look exactly like this, but here is a reading passage on the digital SAT. It's just a very quick 20, 30-second read, and they ask you 1 question. So it's a lot of short, there's 18 of these. So it's a lot of short, kind of choppy reads. But not a long kind of, you don't have to maintain a long stream of focus on any one topic. Now, that's kind of the main difference reading comprehension wise. If, I think, you know what, I want to actually, go to, you know what I'm going to do actually? I'm going to go back to the test 1 quick time more. The grammar on the new digital SAT is going to be peppered in with the reading. So within the same section, everybody can see here is a punctuation question that would be grammar. So on the new digital SAT, grammar questions are just kind of peppered in with the reading. So here's a grammar question on the new digital SAT asking about punctuation. Now, on the current SAT, the grammar questions are just about the same topics: punctuation, verb subject agreement. I saw the grammar to be questions to be very much similar, but the difference is on the current SAT, it's not peppered in with the reading. On the current SAT, you have 1 section that's mainly reading comprehension, and one section that's all reading comp, and another section that's basically all grammar. So that's, again, I think the main difference is not so much the grammar, much more the reading on the 2 tests. Now, there are some differences in question types. There are 3 question types on the current SAT that are no longer going to be on the new digital SAT. And I'm noticing we're at 8:20, and I was going to kind of go through each of these types, but you'll have my contact info if you want more information on this, but I realize that I probably burned too much time going over these. So evidence, I'll quickly mention them here, but evidence questions on the current SAT are in reading comprehension. There's a number of questions that ask you, where is the evidence for the previous questions? You'll answer a question, and then a subsequent one will say, where is the evidence for it? And they'll give you some different line options. They're getting rid of that. There are questions on the current SAT that ask you, where should a sentence logically go in a passage? So you have different places where you could put it. In a nutshell, I'll say most students will probably be happy to see these 2 question types go. I do get a lot of complaints about them. And there's another question. There are questions that in section 2 of the current SAT that ask, the author is considering adding this sentence, or the author is considering deleting this sentence. Should the author do this? They're getting rid of that. I don't get a lot of complaints about that one. I think people are pretty much neutral towards it. And then you'll see a couple of new question types on the digital SAT. One of them being just kind of your classic sentence fill-ins, a vocabulary word. a sentence with a blank and a vocabulary word that needs to go in there. And there'll be a choice, multiple choice of 4 words. Then there's another question type called data synthesis. That one's really hard to describe, so I'll just go to that one real quick. On the digital SAT, a data synthesis question looks like this. They will give you a student's notes in bullet list on a certain topic, and then they will ask a question. The student wants to compare the 2 women's contributions to the March on Washington. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish this goal? So you're kind of picking out what the best notes are to answer a certain question. I didn't find these to be terribly atrocious question types. So in a nutshell, overall, if I were to say, well, what's better, sticking with the unique questions of the current test or taking your chances with getting rid of these and going to new question types on the digital SAT, I found the new digital SAT to be a little bit friendly in terms of question types, adding things that weren't so bad and maybe getting rid of things that I felt got a lot of complaints. Last thing real quick, people ask about vocabulary. It's very difficult to study for vocabulary on any exam because vocabulary is so seemingly limitless. No matter how many words you actually study the definitions of, what are the chances you're going to actually see those words on your test? Usually the probability is very low. So this is a concern. So which test is stresses vocab more? As a matter of fact, it's not too much different. There's 8 vocabulary-based questions in section 1 of the old SAT, and then about 3 or 4 in section 2. That's a total of 12. And then on the new SAT, there's also about a total of 12 very vocabulary-based questions, but they're more evenly split. But the overall number is about the same. I wasn't seeing any advantage on either test. Like, if you really struggle with vocab, should you wait for the new one or should you take the current one? Nah, didn't see too much difference. So I will kind of summarize quickly by saying, once again, I'm going to go back to this. Once again, everything I've done, all of this literature is on my website. So if you wanted to kind of look at this stuff again, it's all going to be here. And the other thing that's going to be on my website, if you want to take a diagnostic exam, and I think honestly, the webinar is great. It gives you a taste, but the only way you're really going to know, hey, which test do I like better? I think you're going to have to try the test. So on my website, you can take an SAT diagnostic, one of the current form. You can photo the bubble sheet, text it to me, and I can even send you an analysis and grade. You can take a new digital SAT, but as mentioned, I actually am not yet finding access to computer-based adaptive tests. What you're going to see when you click on this is a linear paper test, but it's going to be in the style of the new SAT with those particular question types. So a paper version of the digital SAT. And if you want to take an ACT, if you decide you like that way more than either version of the SAT, then you don't have to worry about a change at all. I'm going to stress that you plan your test dates carefully. Again, the calendar of test dates will be right there for you. Base it on a little bit on, do I want to stick with the current SAT? Do I want to take the new one? And then there's also more about, like, I would say, consider the right number of attempts. I think 2 to 3 attempts at a test is good. You might need a second and third attempt in order to really hit your stride. On the other hand, I don't normally see anyone make a huge difference in their score beyond a third attempt. It happens, but it's pretty rare. So I think plan for like 2 or 3 attempts of either the current SAT or the digital one. Again, if you want to do both, you got to be the type of person with a lot of energy and gas in the tank. You can do it, but I would prefer to choose one or the other. All right, so I know I went long. And I am good to stay a little bit past, certainly past 8:30, if there is a lot of live question and answer. Jen, I don't know if you can stay a little bit too.
Yeah, absolutely. This is great, Jim. It's just wonderful, very detailed information and it's a lot of information, but
Yeah,
thank you for
it is a lot.
digesting it for us, and it
It,
definitely made it easier to
yeah.
understand for sure.
And I want people certainly, it is a lot at once that I'm spewing at you. So, like, again, Jen is going to email people my contact info. If it felt like a whirlwind, you can certainly watch the recording again, but you can also, like, you can text me, call me, send me an email, we can chat. So don't feel as though you would have needed to memorize or take notes on every single nuance.
Absolutely. We do have a question here. If a student will be taking the new digital SAT format beginning March 2024, when do you recommend starting to take test prep courses?
If you're going to do the new digital SAT, um, I think I personally would still not prep for it until the winter of your junior year. So, whether you work with me or another source of test prep, a lot of courses are between 6 and 12 weeks. So, if you're talking about the March SAT of 2024, prep for that would probably begin, beginning of January at the earliest. So I'm going to say right about January of 2024, start prepping. Because remember, you're going to also have all of that spring and summer and the fall of your senior year. So I don't think you got to go crazy. Remember, you want to be able to focus on school, GPA, extracurrics, all of that stuff plays in college application. So I personally don't like an overly long period of worrying about the SAT. So quick answer to that, I'm going to say January of 2024 you would start. And you can always, if you want a quick taste, obviously take a practice test here and there. You could take a digital SAT, at least that paper version this summer, just to kind of ramp up a little bit and get familiar. But I wouldn't start big time prep until the winter.
Yeah, I would agree. That's great advice, Jim. And like you said too, like most students, we recommend taking it 2 to 3 times. So even if you're prepping in January and you're not happy with the score in March, you can always take the May one or the June one or, later ones too.
Right. I wouldn't prep for 6 months for the March exam because presumably you'll want to take it twice or maybe at most 3 times. So I would say doing 6, 8, 10 weeks of prep before the March is totally fine. So yeah, and also I feel like after 6 months, let's say you take the test 2 or 3 times. Let's say you've prepped before each one, and the total is 6 months of like prep. I find people eventually kind of sealing out, and like beyond that, you've kind of reached the peak of what you're going to do. And I'm not saying everyone, but statistically, for the most part, 80% of people, 90% of people, yeah, they're going to sealing out after 3 attempts and after 6 months of prep, and only very few after that period are going to find some new spike in their ability. At least that's my experience.
No, absolutely. I would agree with that, Jim. And like you said, other things matter too. SAT, ACT is just one factor. So you definitely
Right.
don't want to stress yourself out with all the prep. So
Yeah. You don't want to
yeah.
get tunnel vision on it, that's for sure. Especially because schools, most schools are test optional too. So if anything, like its level of importance has for some schools like decreased.
True. When do we prep for PSAT?
You know, for the most part, I actually tell people not to prep for the PSAT. The PSAT, by its very name, stands for pretty much a practice SAT. I think it's a way to get your feet wet. feel what a test day is like, feel what the SAT is going to be like. So I think the PSAT is in and of itself very valuable prep for the SAT. But that's what it is. It's prep on its own. And the only exception to what I'm saying, the only reason I feel that you would want to really worry about prepping for the PSAT is if you are shooting for national merit finalist, national merit scholarship, and that's something that's offered if you score in the top 1%. So if you feel you're an extremely high academic achiever and you have a chance of being in that top 1%, you might prep for the PSAT in order to earn, shoot for that scholarship, which isn't huge. It's about $2,500. But other than that, I don't see a huge reason to prep for the PSAT. If you insisted on it, treat it like an SAT. Prep for 6 weeks, 8 weeks before the PSAT. And that would mean starting maybe the beginning of September. But I would focus more on school personally.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. And also PSAT, you do just get the one shot, right? So it's not like with the SAT, you're able to take it multiple times. The PSAT, like for that national merit finalist scholarship that Jim was mentioning, there is really just the one chance that you get. So, you either get it or you don't get it. So
Right, exactly.
great. Any other questions? Folks have questions, feel free to also unmute if you want to just shout it out too.
Yeah, that's totally fine. That's how I conduct my SAT classes. I just tell people, don't worry about being polite, just interrupt.
And Jim, you do the in-person classes as well as virtual now?
Right
Or
now, I am conducting tutoring in person. And I have an office that I share at Corporate Woods with the College Advisor of New York. Um, my classes right now are all just Zoom online. Um, but next year, I'm definitely playing with the idea of going back to hosting, like doing both, hosting a Zoom class one night of the week and doing an in-person class on a different night of the week, because certainly we're kind of far enough away from the biggest of pandemic fears, for me to be too concerned anymore. But yeah, for now, group classes I'm just doing on Zoom.
great, thank you. And I think a lot of students too, it's easier for them. There's just less travel time, right, for Zoom for sure. So that
Yeah,
makes a lot of sense.
in person is definitely, in my mind, more fun and more engaging, and I like it a lot more. But for the sake of convenience, especially in the winter when you have huge snowstorms here and there, like I understand certainly also after an extra curric, you've come home and maybe the last thing you want to do is go back out again. So Zoom's got the advantage on convenience. I'll give it that.
Yeah, definitely one of the advantages of what we got out of the pandemic, right?
Yeah, I never would have actually even learned Zoom if not for the pandemic. I was very, very old school, always in person. But I give Zoom credit. Like it actually has worked for me. I haven't had one Zoom class disaster where I lost everybody or anything happened. So it's been all right. But I guess we were kind of forced to making sure that everything online works really well.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jim. This was wonderful. And thank you, everyone, for joining. Like I said, we'll be reaching out with a link to the recording for everyone. And Jim's information is also in the chat, and we'll be sending that out via email as well. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out directly to him about anything SAT, ACT testing related. And my contact will be there as well if you guys have any other questions regarding college applications and college admissions. So thank you again, Jim, and have a great night, everyone.
Jennifer, thank you so much for getting this together.